imagine a place where you feel really safe and comfortable. Imagine a place where there's people that you feel you can trust. For a lot of people, the place that they might have just imagined would be their religious community. And while religious communities are usually very trustworthy, safe places where people feel comfortable, sometimes they can bring a lot of harm and abuse. And so today we'll be exploring how that is possible.
Awesome. So just to lay out our thesis, we're arguing that the unique nature of hierarchical religious organizations means that abuses of power often go unchecked, leaving the most vulnerable individuals unprotected.
And so Marisa just mentioned the unique nature of religion, and that could be a little confusing. So we did break it down into different aspects. And one of the first ones is blind faith. A lot of religions, no matter what denomination or what practice, they tend to encourage their followers to have faith in the religion and in the leaders of the religion. And part of this is because of the belief that the church and the religion and the leaders are powerful and have authority from divine sources. Another thing that makes religion unique from other organizations is that it tends to have a lack of oversight, and this is compounded by the idea of separation of church and state. So government tends to try to stay out of religions. A third unique nature of religion is this idea of high stakes within religion. Within religion, obedience and disobedience are associated with oftentimes eternal consequences. And that means that sometimes people are afraid to speak up about issues they see or to call out religious leaders because they're afraid of negative eternal consequences.
Perfect. And so in order to examine the power dynamics in these hierarchical organizations, we use social dominance theory, which posits that individuals with less power suffer from their inferior status while powerful individuals benefit. It also posits that dominant leaders will support policies, ideologies, and hierarchical systems that directly benefit them.
And so our first religion that we chose to look at Catholicism. And the reason why we chose it is because it's such a large practice, and also because it has a very clearly defined hierarchical structure, so it goes with our thesis pretty well. So Catholicism teaches that it is the original Christian faith founded directly by Jesus Christ himself. Catholics value good deeds and helping vulnerable members of society, as well as those in need. However, at the same time, in 1950 to 2009, U.S. dioceses paid over $2.6 billion in abuse-related costs. And allegations reported to bishops of abuse included 6,721 accused priests, as well as 18,565 victim reports. So you might be wondering who is vulnerable in the structure of this religion. It might be surprising that 81% of abuse victims are male. There are female victims as well, and they tend to be on the younger age range from about ages 1 to 7, while males are usually abused older, like over age 11. Females are also more likely than males to report abuse. It's estimated that about 21% of female abuse victims will say something about the abuse, while only 16% of males do. And so connecting this back to our thesis and the idea of power and authority, we wanted to examine the hierarchical structure again. So it begins with the Pope, also called the Bishop of Rome. He is the head of the Holy See administration in Rome, and he's considered the direct successor of St. Peter, which gives him, of course, a lot of authority. Underneath him, we have bishops, and they are viewed as the direct successors of Christ's apostles, which again gives them power and authority, and people can trust in them. And so for this research, we decided to look at case studies of what is happening. And so for one abuse case took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in this abuse case, there was a father named Ernest Peone, a priest. He was caught molesting 2 boys and also using guns with young children. However, he was not arrested. While the police were called, he was actually covered for by a fellow priest. In addition, the district attorney in charge of this case ended up dropping it because he later stated that he wanted the church's support in his career. So again, we see a lot of people, both within the church and even outside of it, using their power and authority to protect abusers. Father Peone ended up being moved from location to location, and he always received glowing letters of review from his superiors, the bishops, because they wanted to make sure he could have a comfortable new position wherever he was. He was able to retire in good standing with the church and collect a really comfortable pension. And then we also wanted to connect it to the second idea, which is faith and moral authority. So how does that lead to abuse? Catholicism does teach that the church itself is infallible. Catholic Catechism states that the church is unerring in matters of faith and morals, and in addition, priests are viewed as father figures. They are considered to develop character, self-confidence, and moral and spiritual values, even mental health in the children that they can influence. Catholics also tend to ascribe to a belief called collegiality, which basically states that good Christians should fully respect and obey the hierarchical structure of the church. And then for our third case study, which shows kind of how this works. There was a priest accused of sexual abuse of an 11-year-old student and altar boy in his parish. For 5 years, he plied the boy with alcohol and took him on long-distance trips. He gained the boy's trust by giving him gifts and special attention. And I think the most concerning part of this, it is that a lot of church members were aware of what was happening. Not all of them were aware of the abuse, but they did know that he was taking this boy on trips and giving him a lot of special attention. But most of them didn't suspect anything because they had faith in him as a religious leader, and those that did were too afraid to speak up against his reputation.
Awesome. So we wanted to make sure, since we're not examining specifically Catholicism, we're arguing that religion as a whole has hierarchies that set up vulnerable individuals, or not set up necessarily, that sometimes leave vulnerable individuals vulnerable to abuse. And so we decided to examine additionally Tibetan Buddhism, largely again because we wanted to get more well-rounded perspective, like the East and West example. One thing that I found interesting about Tibetan Buddhism is it's often seen as being very benign and is rarely associated with abuse, largely because it's seen as being a very peaceful tradition. Also, another draw to studying Tibetan Buddhism is even though I am an outsider to the religion, I do have some personal exposure. When I was 18, I actually stayed in a small Tibetan village in northern India for 2 months and worked in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. Okay, so just to give everyone a little bit of background about this tradition, Buddhism is amongst the oldest and most influential traditions in the world, and the Tibet didn't embrace Buddhism until 7th century CE. And then once they did, they blended it with their local religion, which was shamanistic and animistic. The Dalai Lama is currently the spiritual and political leader of the Tibetan community in exile, which now resides in northern India. And he comes from a long line or lineage of religious leaders. Okay, so I examined the Tibetan Buddhist ideology of reincarnation because it inspires the blind faith in moral leaders and gives certain individuals moral legitimacy from birth. And this reincarnation is actually how the succession of high lamas is determined. Oh my gosh. Oh, whoa, okay. A little quick preview. We're excited. So if you're wondering.
We're going to pause on the time, it's
Yeah. So these are the works that we cited.
If it's giving you, you can just use the space bar.
We might have to. Yeah. Does the space bar work better? If you just turn it off. Yeah, you know you just turned it off.
No, I'm sorry.
No, let me see. It's working.
Marisa, I have another clicker.
Yeah, let's try another clicker.
So
So sorry.
It wasn't working. Yeah.
This will be better for the rest.
So one of the reasons as well that Tibetan Buddhism is considered to have moral legitimacy is because of the Dalai Lama's non-violent approach. Oh, fancy. Non-violent approach to the conflict with China, the ongoing conflict between China and Tibet.
The bottom one should do.
So reincarnation is a Tibetan Buddhist ideology which inspires the blind faith in individuals and they are given moral legitimacy from birth. And reincarnation is actually how the succession of high lamas is determined. In order to identify these individuals who are incarnates of previous lamas, search parties will go out and they might look for some sort of identification, like a birthmark that resembles a birthmark that the previous lama might have had. Also, they look for children that might exhibit special knowledge of the previous lama's past life, or maybe a child that exhibits special talents. So Songyal Rinpoche is the author of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which is very popular in the West, which makes him actually the second most famous Lama after the Dalai Lama. And he is considered by many to be the reincarnation of a very famous and prestigious Lama, which gives him moral authority. He threatens any of his students who are disobedient with an infinity of unfortunate rebirths. With an infinity of unfortunate rebirths. And again, that kind of goes back to this idea of eternal consequences that is associated with religion. He runs 100 Buddhist centers called Rigpa across 40 different countries. And in 2018, a law firm came out with reports from multiple students claiming that he physically, mentally, and sexually abused them. He apparently uses his crazy wisdom to discipline his students, which comes in the form of being punched in the stomach, beaten to the point of bleeding, and even to the point of being concussed. Since these allegations have come out, he has just retired or taken a step back from directly running his centers. I also wanted to look at the hierarchical structure within Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, largely because of my personal experience in them. So because of my personal experience, I also wanted to focus on northern India. So what's interesting about monasteries in northern India is it functions kind of like an orphanage in many ways. Poor families who cannot provide resources for their children will send them to the monasteries to become a monk. And because of the nature of monasteries, older boys are often left to watch younger boys with very little oversight. Also, the more experienced or older monks are given more power and authority over the younger monks. In Tibetan culture, there's a long tradition of using corporal punishment to discipline young children, which, when you look at the structure within any monastery and this ongoing tradition, you can assume that children are left very vulnerable to this corporal punishment or abuse. Unfortunately, it's very taboo to make reports against lamas, or many of these students are not, or monks are not in a place where they do feel like they have the power to make these accusations or reports. However, during my limited time there, it was apparent that this is an ongoing and widespread problem. So Kali Rinpoche is a reincarnation of a famous lama. And at the age of 9, he was sent to live in a monastery in India. Later on in his life, once he had some more power and prestige, he claimed that during his time in the monastery, he was sexually abused and threatened by older monks. So again, it's important to keep in mind that this is an accusation, but this individual had a lot of power and authority himself. So just to reiterate our thesis, we are arguing that the unique nature of religion, such as the inspiration of blind faith in moral leaders and the hierarchical structure within these organizations, leaves individuals vulnerable to abuse. In my certain case, in the case study on Tibetan Buddhism, I think it's really important to exercise caution when examining a practice that exists outside of your own culture. Because you never know, you might be looking at the practice from an ethnocentric lens or from the lens of your own culture and your own culture's moral compass. So it's really easy to make an incorrect judgment if you don't understand the cultural context.
At the same time, one of the first religions that we talked about was Catholicism, and that is something that is a global religion, but it also is obviously prevalent in the United States, which is our own country. And so in the case of examples like that, we did want to say that it might be good to have more external accountability and to have perhaps more of like an outside source of holding people accountable within the church. And we can go to the next point. point, recently there was something happened in the news, I was only in the past few days, but Pope Francis actually issued an official statement to the Catholic Church, and he is now requiring priests and nuns to report sexual abuse that they think could be happening or that they know is happening. And I think that's a great step forward, but at the same time, obviously, historically, that hasn't been enough to cover, to fix a lot of the abuse that's happening, as we've seen a lot of people have just had their abuse covered by their superiors. So because of that, I think in the case of like traditions within our country, it would be good to have more external accountability, maybe through the law.